So let's start. I want to, yeah, let's just open this up to everyone. And we'll go Madeleine, and we'll go Pamela. So if you can go Madeleine. Yeah. And we'll try to, Alex, you're there. Perfect. Okay.
Beyond. There.
Yeah, there we go. And Alex, can you hear?
Alex?
Okay.
Hi, Alex. Hi, Sandy. So one of the things that I have quite a number of things that I want to sort of mention is that we've not been very good as a country for 50 plus years in ensuring that the investments that we make in infrastructure has been sufficient or adequate, and sometimes we forget the ancillary sort of requirements. So I just want to raise two examples, different from yesterday. Nasittuq base. The Auditor General in his Arctic security report referenced the lack of heating infrastructure at the naval base, which will prevent refueling of vessels and limits Arctic patrols to only 4 weeks a year. So great that we're getting the new vessels, but someone forgot about sort of, the additional requirements. CHARS, a gorgeous $230 million building in Cambridge Bay. If you haven't been to that community and seen that building, I highly recommend it. But I recall when I was mayor and I was actually doing some research on fire fighting and sort of like, how the other communities were dealing with that. The SAO at the time, after sort of the, discussing how they were set up, said, but we don't have a fire truck. And I was like, what? And they said, and she said, well, if CHARS burnt down, we couldn't actually put the fire out. And I was like, what? So I happened to know the deputy minister at the federal government responsible for properties and said, hey, Kevin, like you're building this beautiful facility, but the community actually doesn't have a fire truck. And so guess what? They got a fire truck. And then I bumped into the mayor, Pamela Gross at the time, who I was a friend with. And I was like, oh, great, you got the fire truck. And she said, yes, but they forgot to give us the building that actually keeps the truck warm so that, it's not frozen. And I'm just like, oh my God. So I just wanted to use those two examples. An additional one about CHARS is that, again, Ottawa seemed to forget that a research station, one of their biggest problems is the lack of good communications. Because who knew that doing research requires sharing and receiving a lot of data? So thank you for everything that people have said today. But I also want to raise, the issue of new technologies that seem to, be in the works, but not everyone is fully aware of. So we do have SMRs or MMRs, being developed in this country. For those who don't know what that stands for, those are modular micro-reactors or small modular reactors. They're effectively nuclear, but on a much smaller scale. So they're being developed 500 kilowatts to 5 megawatts sort of SMRs that are actually scalable. And that can provide what the Kudlik Energy Corporation says is, the need for guaranteed firm power, effectively replacing base power, which is currently diesel. And there's 177 Indigenous communities in this country that are 100% diesel dependent, 300 communities that are partially diesel dependent. So we need to be looking at that as potential, alternative, especially, when we have other current projects that are in the mix, whether it's in Nunavut or in the Kivilik, and not to say that, those projects can't and shouldn't go ahead, but maybe we're at a stage, where these new technologies are sufficiently, in play. So their SMRs are going to happen sometime between the next 5 to 10 years. And we need to be looking at the environmental impacts, the costs, base load power, redundant power, because the last thing you want to do is, put significant investment into something where diesel is still your backup. That is not, what we want. So a comparative analysis, I think, on new technologies is something that's probably worth, considering. And also recognizing that we're not going to achieve net zero in this country without nuclear being part of the mix, and also in the rural, remote communities. But that also means, as the communities have said, frequent, continued engagement early on, because it's not going to happen without Indigenous, consultation and Indigenous buy-in. So the communities that don't want, an MMR or an SMR, it's not going to happen. But there may be communities that do, if they understand, what that's all about and the risks and how those risks are mitigated and how the nuclear Canadian industry is going to ensure that they are safe to use. I'm not quite done yet, sorry. Because I'm not up there. Another new evolving technology is airships. And it's like SMRs. They're going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. It's no longer a joke. It's no longer if, it's a when and where. So D&D did actually a study and determined that it's feasible and meets their needs sufficiently so that their recommendation was to actually have procurement issue an RFP for a pilot project and to include it in a Nunavut exercise. There is a draft airship feasibility study that is now looking at for civilian and commercial purposes. And the final study should actually be published in May 23. What's fascinating about sort of that is that it's identified 5 transportation hubs: Sheffaville, Moosonee, Churchill, Iqaluit, Yellowknife/Enterprise. It is transformative because it will do things like extend cargo year-round. It will also be, in some cases, cheaper than possibly building a year-round road, because a year-round road is about $3 million per kilometer, and then is fraught with risks, not only because of impacts to wildlife, but is also fraught with now climate change risks and requires a lot of maintenance. So airship cargoes have a very low environmental impact, extends year-round cargo. Now imagine year-round cargo in Nunavut, where the government wants to build 3,000 houses, and having to wait for just a tiny little window of, the shipping season varies between sort of, let's say, July to October. But then I recall when I was mayor one year, the ships came in early July, but then the southerly winds brought in this multi-pack ice, and the ships were stuck for 6 weeks and actually couldn't go out to resupply other communities, and they couldn't unload. That was a cost of $75,000 a day. 42 days at that cost was over $3 million. So the shipping company ate that cost, but I can promise you they put that cost on to the customers, and the customers was us. So, huge sort of, opportunity, as well as for the loss or now the shortening season of the ice roads, which are becoming shorter and shorter and more dangerous. So comparative analysis is being currently done. There's also the opportunity of shipping, household and office goods, because I just want to remind people who don't live in the north, is that the stores have to bring in a year's supply of toilet paper, a year's supply of dog food, all the appliances that they expect that our community may or may not buy, for that year, couches, paper, inks, and having to have the space to be able to accommodate that. It's significant, and some of that stuff can get cold and frozen, but some of it can't. You can't freeze tinned tomatoes, to give you an example. So that's, again, a potential huge, savings. Mining needs shipping. So the airships are also now actually the airship study is being supported by some mining companies, because they recognize that roads are expensive and they need to ship in and they need to ship out. So really interesting. And last point, because I'm talking about transformative technology. So fiber optic is not new, and actually is being built all around the world. 99% of our telecommunications happens on fiber. Subsea fiber we have in places like the Nordic countries, Iceland, Faroe Islands, Greenland, Alaska. Where we don't have subsea cables yet is in Canada's north, but there's also an opportunity to actually have those cables be smart cables. Science monitoring and reliable telecommunications, that means sensors on those cables. So we know that in up north, that 80% of Canada's marine protected areas are in our region. We know with climate change there's increased shipping. We know that the climate change is also affecting fish and whale and seal migrations. But we have virtually little to no marine subsea data. We don't even have the baseline data. And we also know that the military want all domain awareness and for continental defense. Satellites are great for basically, and the radar system, for knowing what's happening in the airspace, or potentially on the ground or on the surface of the water, but we don't have any way of monitoring consistently the marine environment. So at the same time, Russia and China are bringing in submarines or unmanned underwater drones into our waters. We need to be able to monitor that. So last two things on the fiber optic, mines are going robotic. It is happening. De Beers wants to basically do that, and you need fiber optic. But we also need fiber optic to help monitor and supply energy efficiencies, especially if there are multiple sources of power, and or to support redundancy. So when one power grid goes down, basically you've got redundancies, another power grid goes up, and there's no awareness of the communities or the end users. So what I'm just saying is that we do have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with all these investments that the federal government is making in energy, in telecommunications, potentially with NORAD modernization, but it's all siloed.
Yep.
There's no strategy. We're making investments in some cases, not the best investment, not multi-purpose, not multi-user, not good for the communities, not good for the resource sector, or good for the resource sector, but then not good for the communities, or not good for the military. So when you talk about limited resources, we must do better. Because when we mess up these investments now, the risks and the harms of those investments will be borne by us Northerners and by us as Canadians, because it won't meet not only our security and prosperity at the local level, at the regional level, but also at the national level. So that's my diatribe. I'm done.
Yeah, no, that is, it's... And I think this speaks, and I'm going to let everyone comment on that, but it speaks precisely to strategy, but I also feel like it speaks to we're missing the vision. We're missing like where we want to maybe be in a certain amount of years, and then where we think, what we need to do to get there. And in terms of coordinate, because we've been talking about the Grays Bay Port and Road for, I don't know now how many years. It's like the new 1960s thing or something, right, of this era. But we also see that around the world that cars are going automated, and they're and they're battery. But to have an automated car, you're going to need, of course, the fiber cable. But then you also, and this is where the sensors in the roads come in. And so, are we even talking about these kind of things? And so, are we still talking about things that won't even be in operation by the time? So it's exactly this. And so, how do we think more strategically and with a more long-term vision to really actually understand what's ahead of us and where we're going and where the world is going. So I'll let everyone pick up on.
If I may, I'd like to make the point that in my mind the strategy starts with the people. Yes, there is a one in a generation opportunity now to affect public policy, but in my mind, it's only partially due to the geopolitical situation, and it's much more to do with the population explosion that we have in, especially Nunavut. I've got 2 sons I raised in Nunavut, and one's deployed over in Latvia right now, but one's just starting off thinking about getting a career here pretty soon. And he's got a lot of company. There's around 10,000 Inuit in Nunavut that are going to come of age in the next 10 years. We had at the start of settlement in Nunavut only around 7,000 Inuit. Now there's close to 40,000 Inuit, I think. So those are Canadian citizens. We're all Canadian citizens. We can contribute, and we want to have a prosperous and safe life, just like anyone else where we're from. We talk about critical minerals, the existing gold mining potential that's being realized in Nunavut. We talk about the need for multi-billion-dollar defense infrastructure upgrades. We talk about the need to build 3,000 houses. That's a goal that they have, and that takes a lot of people, a lot of skilled people. And we have many young people that are ready to take on that challenge, but we have to prepare them. We need to support them in our education system and post-secondary education and training. And that to me is a really big part, is the human capital. We talk about bricks and mortar, but and at the end of the day, it's about people. And that's what should be driving our decision making, is to provide a good future for our young people that are coming out to be young adults right now. That's going to take a lot of collaboration between industry and government. Agnico, we're the biggest set of apprentices in Nunavut right now. So we're doing a lot of heavy lifting within our company once we hire people to train people, but we really can't do it alone. And we look forward to working with the government to see investment in vocational training in the north to give these young folks a future and a chance, an opportunity. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I would say the important thing to know and understand is that individuals in the South, whether they be government or other industry, doesn't understand the North and the communities. And it's important to consult with those communities, because you may have an idea and think that this is a great idea and it's going to help the community, it's going to make their life better. And then if you don't consult with them, you don't truly understand what their needs are. And that, yes, it may be a little helpful, but if you just tweaked it here or did this, then it would be so much more of a positive impact on the community. And, you know, I was on a panel a couple weeks ago with an Air Force and a Navy representative, and they were talking about how they had joined up together and actually went to some community leaders and talked to them about what the Air Force and the Navy was looking at doing in that community. So they had received feedback from the leaders as to what would be good or not good, and they were going to take that into consideration as they went forward with their planning. So I think that's important for everyone to understand.
Mm-hmm. And I think some of the stuff that we're talking about is just we all need to learn about these things, right? So it's I think it's a learning curve for everyone.
Yeah, it's like the fire truck, you know. Down here you would say, oh, not a big deal, you just put it in a garage. Well, they don't necessarily have garages, or if they have a garage, it's full of stuff already. And putting another big fire truck is a good solution, but it's not the answer.
Yeah, a lot we could follow up on from Madeleine's excellent commentary. And the fire truck example. I was on municipal council before I was a federal politician, and we did buy a fire truck that didn't fit in our fire hall, but we had the option. It went to the workshop, so there was an option to put it in a shop, in a shed. But obviously, if that's not the option, and that's again from a southern Canada perspective, hearing stories like that kind of show where we have to have a change in governance, a change in management for a lot of projects. So there is Indigenous and Inuit participation at the management, at the leadership level of any project, any activity that's undertaken. So there is that understanding that you wouldn't want me from Southern Ontario up managing a project because I don't understand the specific local challenges and opportunities. And if I can follow up on just one other aspect of Madeleine raised the Nasittuq example and the Auditor General's report. And I think sometimes at a government level, there's that fear of the Auditor General. There's the fear of failure, for lack of a better phrase. And so sometimes we see that failure and then get scared and get hesitant to do a project because of the potential of failure, because of the potential of the Auditor General coming in and smacking down a government department or agency. And I think that's a dangerous situation long term, especially when you're having projects undertaken in the north where there are a lot of variables. We've heard examples of COVID affecting deliverables, a poor shipping season affecting projects, affecting the ability to lose an entire season. So we have to find a way, and again, I don't have the answer, we have to find a way that we can accept risk and accept that there will be failures, for lack of a better word, but we need to get past that, and we need to be able to get to the outcome, even if there are roadblocks along the way, like not having heated capacity for 4 weeks of the year. That's a pretty big hiccup. But if there's a way that we can get beyond that failure to the next step.
I think the government can leverage off of private industry and our experience and our knowledge that we have gained in establishing supply chains, logistics in the Arctic to do our business. All of these things that need to be done to get a nut and a bolt from Quebec up to Meliadine or Meadowbank, those things are mission critical. If we don't do those things, then we're out of business. So we have to get it right every time. And there's one group in the Arctic that is proven to be able to execute projects on time and on budget, and that's the mining industry. And we like to provide our sharings and learnings and work with government in the areas of project management. And that might be one of our other contributions towards nation building and creating better communities in the north. I'd mention that as well because it's unfortunate to hear some of these things going on about poor project execution, but we have to realize that you can do it right. You can get it right, and there's examples of this that we can follow.
Just Jessica, if I could, just to build on that, what Madeleine said, I think everybody needs to keep in mind that it takes time to build these infrastructure projects. So there might be a long planning and policy cycle, but when the point in time comes to say, okay, let's do X, Y, or Z, then it takes time to actually build that. And in the north, that cycle is exacerbated by the logistical challenges that you have for materials. And even, and I just point to the shipbuilding strategy, you even have to invest in the infrastructure in the shipyards to build the ships. Yeah. So if you start realizing some of these things, you're not just going to snap your fingers and say, we're going to have a port, we're going to have a road, we're going to have fiber. Like, the vessels that lay the subsea fiber, or even the ones that do offshore wind, those vessels that stick those turbines and towers, they're scheduled 2 and 3 years out. So you have to understand that it's good. That has to be part of the view, right? Is that time to build it?
Yeah, kind of comes to the long-term piece, and then
a couple of points. Canada's not the only place where we deliver fire trucks and you don't have a fire hall big enough. I just read in a transportation message I got a couple of days ago about Spanish National Railways having taken delivery of new train sets that won't fit onto the tunnels. And as a result, there's been heads have rolled both at the Spanish National Railways and I think also at the company that built the trains. That's just anecdotally. But on airships, I was so happy to hear what you said about airships. In 1998, I think it was, Dr. Barry Prentice from the University of Manitoba came to me as Minister of Transport with this idea, and my official said, well, you know, he's got this wacko idea about airships. And to me, an airship, having grown up in another era, not quite when it happened, but my view of airships was the Hindenburg crashing, I think it was in the 1930s. That's what I grew up with in the 50s, you know, that was my image. But if you look at the logic of, as has been stated in the North, of getting heavy cargo into the North, why can't we do this? And I went to my officials, and they thought I was a nutter. I was off the wall. And they tried to dissuade me. And, you know, you think ministers are powerful. And it's not something I wanted to go to Jean Chrétien with, you know, because he might have thought I was equally nutty. But he had a good understanding of the North. In any event, nothing has really happened. And I heard from Barry about 6 months ago. He just had another conference. He's still at it. And this is 25 years after. And to me, this is an idea whose time has come. Mm-hmm. And if our friends from industry here are embracing this, this is going to make it happen. And it's going to, in the same way that departments didn't seize drones and the need to regulate drones, they looked at balloons in the same way. Well, we just saw a balloon that's come from China, allegedly blown off course, and then 3 other smaller balloons that we don't know who they are or who they belong to, perhaps private industry, floating around. Well, you know, maybe this is an idea whose time has come, and this could be an environmentally sustainable and very cost-effective way of transporting bulk goods into our Arctic communities.
Can I just make one point? Because I just wanted to get back on point in terms of if you want to create an infrastructure blueprint, because I think we've got lots of really great examples of challenges and opportunities. But also, don't we need to define the value that would be created? So if you were able to say, for example, if we have a comprehensive blueprint for infrastructure development across the board in the Arctic, it's going to put 1 to 2% onto Canada's GDP over the next 30 years. And then you've got something that's going to grab attention potentially politically and also from a media perspective, but also to then beneath that to define what are the benefits community by community, region by region. And I think this is something that needs to happen. So there needs to be some data which is forward-looking, which says if you do this, it's not just about a cost, it's about a value creation, right?
Absolutely. And then and embedded in that, and it kind of goes back to some of these comments about failure and everything, but these are like ideas and projects that there's potential for equity partnerships. And I mean, the Nasittuq, project, it's so you want to get out from under failure. It's not about talking to communities, it's about working with communities, and actually then they're the owners of a lot of these types of, innovations and projects. And to me, that is a example of success when you see that. And I think that's that's embedded in this, piece that you were talking about, is like we need a game plan. We need a game plan, and we need a path forward. And because otherwise we're just all over and
build
an
some
idea
logic
here and
appeal,
there, and
right?
everything just kind of.
You just build logic for what you're doing, and then you say, look, if we do this, this is the value it creates. Not the big cost. It's like
Exactly.
it's jobs, right?
Yeah. Well,
there's structural, softer benefits.
Absolutely.
It's hugely important to define those.
Part of the social contract is to have infrastructure that's needed, but it's also, this is about Canada's future, that kind of thing. Let's do more. Oh, Pamela, you were next. And
then. Pamela Strand, Yellowknife. So thank you for all these examples. We're living airships. We just met with John Wilms from University of Manitoba in Yellowknife. So I think you're right. They are going to be becoming reality. My comments, I guess, kind of are already being answered as we go here, but more about how we raise awareness for the Arctic the right way. As a person living in the Arctic, the earlier conversations we had about, how Canadians perceive the Arctic, and another point about how we engage in the Arctic, we have a saying that we say, nothing for us without us. And that has to be right from the project may change. the project may not happen because of how, there needs to be consensus in how to move forward. And I worry that, how is Canada viewing the Arctic? This is not something there. This is not something to protect. How does the Arctic get embedded as part of Canada and not a thing within every strategy that the federal government does, with every policy that the federal government does, or how, whatever strategies and policies are there. So I don't know what your thoughts are on how to change the dialogue, rather than it being a thing, but how does it get included, as Canada, and could that be part of, a solution to what we're all talking about here for 2 days?
So Pamela and I spoke very briefly before, so I kind of had a heads up where her question might be going. I appreciate that, thank you. But your comment there, nothing for us without us. I mean, I think that's fundamental, and I think, Madeleine, that touches exactly what you were saying as well. I'm from the government, I'm here to help, doesn't always play well when you're preaching. Sorry. But how do we embed this in a decision-making process so it's not a singular issue, but it's embedded, it's throughout. And I look at where things, where different priorities have been undertaken by the current government. Obviously, I'm in opposition, so I don't have the same looking inside of what's going on. But there was I would say, a very concerted effort for a gender-based analysis across government departments, where proposals, issues were all seen through that lens, were analyzed through that lens. And I almost think that we almost need to do that with more issues, whether it's issues of Arctic, whether it's issues of northern issues, rural and remote issues, where we bring forward policies and they're through the process, the development process, they're already being looked at by how they will impact, how they will have an effect on communities, and what the communities, what the individuals, what the communities of interest are saying back at the same time. So it's not a singular step in the process, but it's throughout the process. It's throughout the development stage that's happening. And I think northern issues, Arctic issues are one example, but it could probably be applied to a variety of different examples. And I think gender-based analysis might be one example of how that's been embedded within the structure.
It's nice to hear Pam is there. I think, hi Pam. Well, one comment I would make is one thing our company is looking at is that Nunavut is poised to become a devolved government and join the Yukon and the NWT as a territorial jurisdiction that has control over its lands and waters. And I think that's a very good move to bring decision-making as close as possible to where developments occur. And I'm just wondering if this is another opportunity with the 3 territories, if they were all devolved, to have a common voice on things like infrastructure, and that could be the focus of working with the rest of the nation on these issues.
Thank you. I'm the Finnish ambassador here in Canada. My name is Roy Eriksson. I just wanted to comment on Madeleine when she said about infrastructure and give some hope, maybe, optimism on connectivity. I just recently heard of a commercial project combining through 3 continents, actually. Building of a fiber optic cable from Norway via Iceland through Greenland waters and the Northwest Passage, connecting Alaska and ending up in Tokyo. I know that the consortia is a consortia made up of American, Japanese and European companies, and it's totally on a commercial basis. They have been now starting to talk to local people here in Canada to also engage with them and giving the possibility to have that wide broadband connectivity also in the northern parts of Canada. So I think that if this goes ahead in the medium term, you might have, at least in some communities, a good internet connection. Thank you.
Are there questions? Someone want to jump in? Okay, Pamela, I'm just going to play devil's advocate. Because I hear you, and I think part of what you're saying, though, is like, why is it an other? Why is it something out there because it's part of Canada? Like, why do we have to make it into such a like, you know, why does it have to be so, like, it's, the moon, you know, is part, you know, like, our moon, you know? It's part of the country, and so I think in terms of like the vision and the understanding and the opportunities and like everywhere else. One thing though so there's like two examples I'm thinking of, and one is like for the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and they've got these ideas and these things they want to do, but then it becomes so, it doesn't, in many of these just general structures then, it doesn't offer a lot of opportunity for investment for northern projects because maybe it's not enough capital and it doesn't go far enough, and maybe we need to rethink what a return on investment from the government looks like over the long term differently than in other parts. And the other part was like for the critical minerals strategy, and I thought, well, gosh, is the North just part of the rural, remote, indigenous, or is it the North, and kind of like as a real specific opportunity, but then that requires specific attention because there's more infrastructure into it. And so how not to then things were just, then we don't place the necessary attention to the North, because if it's just, another part of Canada. But maybe that's from the gender lens, kind of perspective, maybe it's different, but way of thinking about it, so I need to think that through. But I guess I'm trying to, please, and go back to me, but I'm oh yeah.
I think it's a double-edged sword, regardless, right? You can put the North on the outside and then think that you'll create the solutions that work for the infrastructure bank and other places. Or you can start a process and try to make it work for everybody from the beginning, which is the whole point about the gender lens, right? So let's stop thinking of everybody as being the same, but let's keep thinking about everybody as being equal, so that we can create a system and a place that works for everybody. So it's not about saying the system has to be the same everywhere. Yeah. It's about saying the system has to work for everybody, right? And I think that's what Pam is trying to say.
I like that. Thank you. That's good. I like that.
Thank you. I want to build on what Alex said earlier, because I think, with 10,000 sort of people coming of age in the next 10 years, has tremendous issues and challenges, but also opportunities. So it reminds me of an earlier conversation I had with someone who wants to build houses in Nunavut, and great, and is working with an Inuit partner on expediting. Great. But I needed to remind them that in Rankin Inlet we have a trades training center. And I actually met with the dean, Albert Natzer, and was thrilled to hear that 85% of the carpenters, or people who are taking carpentry training, graduate. Great news, followed by only 10% of them can get jobs. And this is in a territory where we're building hundreds of millions of infrastructure. And then Albert says, you know, for the other sort of trades, for OBMs, so oil boiler mechanics, for plumbing, for electricians, they can't complete their training in Rankin Inlet. And I said, why? Why can't, is it a question of like, you know, your trainers? And he's like, no, we've got great teachers that can absolutely help these students complete their training here. Problem is, they built the training center too small. And we're standing in this gorgeous atrium and a very long hallway that basically, you know, is as tall as this building, this room. And he's like, if only I could have had more classroom space. I don't need this atrium. I don't need, you know, ceilings this tall in this hallway. I need classroom space so that my students don't have to leave their home community in their home territory to complete their trades. And I said, how many actually leave to do that? And he goes, virtually none. So we set up people to start up a new career in a field that they're really passionate and interested in, and we set them up to fail. So I can look in all my sort of, you know, communities, Iqaluit with the new RCMP, you know, headquarters, again, beautiful atrium. Not enough holding cells, not enough office space. And so what tends to happen is that, you know, because it's in the Arctic and some architect and some, you know, contractors, they can build these sort of like signature pieces, say they've done it, and when it comes to the budget, they have to make cuts. The fancy stuff doesn't get cut. The purpose is what is compromised. The need for the actual sort of like, you know, office space, holding cells, classrooms is what we lose out on. So I want to sort of like, as we build this infrastructure, we need to make sure, and Alex's, you know, point and Pamela's point, and I think, you know, Christy's point, who is sitting beside me, is that we've got to remember to include the development of our people so that they are completely, you know, capable and successful, not set up for failure, because that's not they're not failing because of themselves. They're failing because we've set them up to fail. So we need to do it better on the people front as well.
Jessica,
Oh, sorry, there's,
well, I was just going to bookend to that. I mean, I applaud those remarks because, you know, we're a construction company, we're a builder, we go into places, we don't want to fly in a whole bunch of people. We'd sooner use the people that are there. And to use our Greenland example, we weren't confident that we had the trades force there that were going to be able to support us on the airport project, and we were pleasantly surprised, you know. There were a lot of local Greenlandic people who had done work in the mines and had heavy experience, and we visited the trades college, and the skills and the abilities were there. And so it supplemented our work very well, and we were thrilled with it. And, you know, so as a construction company, I'd echo that. Like, we really want local people.
Yeah.
That's the trades that we want, you know.
Yeah.
It's their community.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, Ilna had a question. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Linur Gudjonsson, the Icelandic ambassador to Canada. I just wanted to follow up on my colleague's, Ambassador Roy, announcement on the submarine cable. So here you have a just over $1 billion project connecting Europe, North America, and Japan and Asia in a one submarine cable. Very interesting project to Iceland, since that would actually connect Iceland to North America in another way than we have today. We have an old Canada string cable, but also connect to our connection to actually connect the Faroe Islands to this Denmark, Ireland, and Scotland through Iceland. But my question is a follow-up question with what I had. So you have a project like that. How do you bring an outside project like that to the territories where you can be kind of sitting down and having that conversation with potentially one body?
I think that's a great question, and actually was something that refers back to the Japanese ambassador. But maybe the folks, like maybe you two want to speak to that, and Madeleine and Tim, you know, like, do you guys want to answer that?
So, like, the difference, I think, in the Canadian federal context is that there's a lot of partners at the table, particularly in the Arctic. So the reality of something like that would require, that's federal jurisdiction. And the federal government then needs to talk to the territorial jurisdiction, although they don't have to, because that would be in the seabed, if I understand, right, which would be completely federal jurisdiction. So they don't have to talk to us. But ideally, this is a situation where the federal government is talking to the territorial jurisdiction and the Indigenous government whose land is adjacent to, because and that's not, I'm not quite sure there where the line of the traditional lands goes, and I can see Madeleine, so that would be like a unique experience per Indigenous claim, Indigenous governance structure. So it like from the outside it looks complicated, but from the inside those relationships all exist. And what needs to happen is that those conversations need to start as early as possible so that those projects can then meet the people's needs who are actually in the place.
The Nunavut land claim agreement actually extends to the ice, which has been argued by our people also extends to the seabed. So when we've seen sort of two seismic testing projects that were proposed off our land in the waters. One was in Lancaster Sound and one was in Davis Strait and Baffin Bay. It was federal government decisions. There were two different departments, and they both died in the courts because they had not meaningfully consulted with Inuit, and Inuit were really concerned about those projects and that the issues were not mitigated and there were no perceived benefits of that project, or of those projects to us. So similarly, we're hearing, Inuit and Nunavut are saying it doesn't matter that it's subsea, and it's not good enough to basically put infrastructure through our lands and our waters and not have us participate. And there is a competitive sort of project, which, I'm in conflict of interest, but I will speak to, is that there is a Nunavut Inuit-led subsea project and an Alaskan partnership that's been in development and a Norwegian partnership. So, again, Inuit want to participate. Telecommunications is a $70 billion sector, which most Indigenous people in Canada have not yet really been able to get into, in part because the federal government's historical and current sort of decisions have largely kept us out, and we pay the highest internet rates or telecommunications rates in this country and receive the absolute worst service. It's just outrageous. And another sort of issue is this whole thing about spectrum. So spectrum, is a resource. It's in airwaves, and the sector buys this from the federal government. And there's now finally some recognition and discussion about, an allocation for Indigenous spectrum, which happens in the United States, which is interesting because the United States is usually not advanced on Indigenous rights, and yet they are there in New Zealand, in Mexico. And so really we're hoping as Indigenous peoples and leaders is to get into this sector in a meaningful way and not as a charity case, and not a like, the main backbone goes through our region. And by the way, you could connect to it if you pay for the branching unit and you've got, your own money for the spur that then connects into the community, and then all the required infrastructure that allows you to connect to that, which is a lot of money. So it's, there are also opportunities if we own the telecommunications infrastructure to develop a digital economy and to develop an Arctic digital economy and an Arctic blue economies. So we've been largely kept out, and we're trying to effectively almost flip the iceberg. Instead of like, us getting a tiny little benefit, is that we get the real tremendous benefits of, this type of transformative technologies. I'm trying not to dominate today.
Somebody had their hand up, I think. Oh.
Thank you. Mike Walsh from Canor. No undersea cable question, but I did want to sort of pass on some of our knowledge that we've picked up, and what we would like to hear perhaps from some of the panelists is actual on-the-ground capacity from government agencies, industry, talking to some of my colleagues, Christy, Tim, and others, that having offices like we do in the 3 territories, the boots on the ground, the people there to have the conversations, not just the fly in, fly out. Technology is wonderful. I know Alex shares this from his perspective, but the capacity to have people in the communities, and it's not just the 3 territorial capitals, it's the fact that you can then go into, especially now that travel's open, to the actual communities in which these operations are happening. So my question at the end of that would be, from a industry, from a sort of government agency perspective, the capacity to actually have people in the regions of which you either work or plan to work, is that something you see as being important, and how would you go about that? It's not necessarily a cost savings perspective, but it's a necessity because you don't get to have those relationships unless you're actually there.
Point of view from,
I think from the point of view of Davie, if the maintenance and through-life services for the icebreakers that we're going to build is basically as important as the construction of the ship. So at the moment, as we maintain those ships over their 50 years of life, a lot of that would be done in Quebec. But the reality is it would make a huge amount of common sense if we were able to have infrastructure where you could actually do the maintenance on those vessels within the north, right? Yeah. As well as having refueling and all of those other kind of supporting infrastructure. So I think in that sense, strategically, if that was the case, we would absolutely have teams of people up there that would be maintaining the assets in situ rather than always having to come south.
From an Nasittuq perspective, we actually have 5 locations in the north where we live and work. So we do have individuals who are from the communities and they live in the communities, and then they go out to the radar stations to work or sometimes to stay for periods of time. So we do have engagements with local community in those 5 communities.
I wonder if it almost follows up a little bit on Eleanor's question, and it comes, I think it was Pear maybe was talking about maybe building or having an office somewhere in the north. I think there was a discussion, no, like a trade office, no. Who? Trade desk. Yeah, trade. Oh. So yeah, but because it seems, it's this relationship building and being boots on the ground in order to create good relations, and so it doesn't have to be a fiber cable. It could be any project, and because you're saying like what's the first step, right? And how do you engage? I don't know. So is it to have then like an actual? But what happens if you're Yeah, I guess so. If you have boots on the ground and you're there over a long haul, so you have to, and that maybe goes back to these conversations. You always have to know if you're, if you want to work in the north, it's the long-term commitment, and that's why, like companies like Agnico has been successful because they're there for the long haul.
Jessica, from our point of view, it doesn't always have to be us, boots on the ground. And we have an Indigenous partner in northwestern Ontario. And the partnership is such that, there's that high level of trust and they're on the ground. Yeah. And we take our lead from them, we talk to them, and they're in the community, they're a part of that landscape there. And so we garner a lot from that, and we learn a lot from that.
So maybe you're a good person to answer that question. So like in going into Greenland, a new space,
Yep.
did that start, did it start kind of being on the ground for a while and getting to know people, or is it, what's just the...
There's definitely, definitely a getting to know each other, but in Greenland as well, we have a company there. They're not a joint venture partner in the strict sense, but they're a local contractor with some capacity, and again, there's that level of trust, and we're working with them, they're doing work for us, and we rely on them pretty heavily to be eyes and ears on the ground and to help us through that. And, so it doesn't always have to be us there on the ground.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yep. Any last minute thoughts? Okay, I'm gonna do one lightning round question. I just have to ask. John, there was like a piece of paper or something with something written on it that you could take to your constituency, which is literally it's on Ontario, far from the north. Like, what would it take to convince them that these kind of big investments are necessary? They're necessary, let's say, on the social end, because they're Canadians, also that live in the north and deserves kind of the equal access to basic infrastructure, and then that this is also for them because it's a Canadian, it's part of Canada, it's a Canadian issue, and I just maybe to end on somewhere.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the title of that House of Commons committee report, nation building.
Yeah.
We're talking about nation building. Diefenbaker back in the late 50s, early 60s, that was part of his vision for the North Roads to Resources. Nation building, focusing on that nation building aspect and bringing it home for folks wherever they
live. Yeah. So, well, thank you all for this really good conversation. I hope everyone else enjoyed it, but I did. And we'll have lunch now, but I think we should give them a round of applause because.